The moment my mother-in-law slid a folded piece of paper across the dining room table and said, "Sign this, or you're no longer welcome in this family." I understood something that had taken me 7 years to learn. She never thought I'd read it first. I'm Lily. I was 38 years old when the woman who had spent the better part of a decade making me feel small finally handed me the one thing I needed to walk away for good. A reason I could explain to anyone. My husband's name is Scott. We met at a work conference in Chicago when I was 31. He was funny and attentive, and in those early months, the kind of man who remembered small things. The way I took my coffee, the name of my college roommate, the anniversary of my mother's passing. I fell in love with that version of him completely. What I didn't fully understand until much later was that Scott had another version. The one that only came out around his family. His mother, Beverly, was the kind of woman who entered a room and immediately began reorganizing it, whether the room wanted her to or not. She had opinions on everything and delivered them with the confidence of someone who had never once been wrong. The way I loaded the dishwasher. The neighborhood we chose to buy our house in. The fact that I kept my last name professionally. The fact that I took fertility treatments when we struggled to conceive. That last one, she mentioned at Easter dinner in front of 12 people, as casually as commenting on the weather. Scott's older sister, Tara, was different only in method. Where Beverly was direct, Tara worked in implication. A raised eyebrow. A pause just long enough to feel deliberate. A comment delivered as a question so it could never be pinned down. "Lily, is that what you're wearing to the christening?" She never said anything was wrong. She just created the feeling that something was. For the first few years, I genuinely tried. I brought food to every family dinner. I remembered birthdays. I asked about people's jobs and their kids and their health and their opinions, because that's what you do. You show up. You make an effort. You build something. What I built, apparently, was a reputation as someone who was trying too hard, which Beverly found suspicious, and not hard enough, which Tara found insulting. I could never locate the version of myself that would satisfy both of them simultaneously. I stopped trying to figure it out around year 4 and just started surviving each visit. Scott knew. I want to be clear about that. He knew how his mother spoke to me. He knew how Tara made me feel. He wasn't oblivious. He was just convinced that if he stayed quiet, things would eventually smooth themselves out on their own. That was his solution to most conflict. Wait long enough, and it would dissolve. What he never understood was that silence, to his family, looked like agreement. We have a daughter. Her name is May, and she was 5 years old when everything finally broke open. She is the reason I did everything that came next, and the reason I would do it all again. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Sunday in late October. Beverly hosts a family dinner every third Sunday of the month. And attendance is not optional. It is mandatory in the way that no one has ever actually said it's mandatory, but everyone behaves as though missing. It would result in some consequence too terrible to name. I had attended roughly 80 of these dinners. I had smiled through approximately all of them. That Sunday, May had been running a low fever since Friday. Nothing alarming. Her pediatrician had said to keep her home and comfortable and to bring her in if it went above 102. It hadn't. But she was tired and clingy and wanted to stay on the couch watching her shows, which seemed like exactly what a sick 5-year-old should be doing on a Sunday afternoon. I texted Beverly that morning. Told her May wasn't feeling well, and we'd sit this one out. Beverly called me within 4 minutes. She didn't ask how May was doing. She asked whether I had given May anything for the fever, as though I might have looked at my sick child and decided medication was optional. Then she told me that a little fresh air would do May good, that children were too coddled these days, and that Scott's grandmother was visiting from out of state, and this was important. I explained, again, that May needed rest. Beverly said, "I'll let Scott know we're expecting you both by 4. She hung up before I could respond. What happened next is something I've gone back to many times. Scott came into the kitchen where I was standing with my phone still in my hand, and I told him what his mother had said, word for word. I watched his face go through 3 or 4 emotions in about 2 seconds, landing finally on something that looked like resignation. She means well, he said. And it would be good for May to see great-grandma. May has a fever, a low fever. She's 5, Scott. Can we just go for a couple of hours? I'll handle my mom. I said fine. I always said fine eventually. That was the pattern, and I had let it become one. We arrived at 4. May sat in my lap the entire evening, warm and quiet in a way that any parent would recognize as not quite right. Beverly greeted us at the door, looked at May, and announced to the room that she looked perfectly healthy to her. Tara, from the couch, said something about how she had always believed children built immunity through exposure. Great-grandma, Agnes, who was 81 and sharp as a tack, looked at May and then at me and said quietly, "Poor little thing." It was the kindest thing anyone said to me all evening. Dinner was the usual performance. Beverly controlled the pacing and the topics. Tara made comments I was expected to absorb without reacting. Scott's brother-in-law talked about his business for 45 minutes, and everyone listened like he was delivering important news. I cut May's food into small pieces and made sure she drank water and checked her forehead every 15 minutes with the back of my hand. At some point during dessert, Beverly mentioned that she and her husband were updating their estate plan. She said it the way you'd mentioned changing the brand of paper towels. Then she looked at me, specifically at me, with the particular expression she reserved for conversations where she wanted me to understand that I was being addressed as a peripheral concern rather than a person. "We've been thinking about the family trust," she said, "about making sure everything stays within the family." No one said anything. The table had that particular silence of people who already know what's coming. "We've had a document drawn up," Beverly continued. "A family agreement. It's standard, really. Most families in our position have something similar." She paused. "It would apply to spouses who came into the family after a certain point." Scott said, "Mom, maybe this isn't the time." "It's perfectly fine," Beverly said. "Lily is family. She can hear this." What she slid across the table was a folded document. Several pages, already printed. I opened it. I am not a lawyer, but I've worked in corporate compliance for 11 years. I know how to read a document. What this one said, stripped of its careful language, was that in the event of divorce or Scott's death, I would have no claim to any portion of the family assets that had passed through their estate, including the portion Scott had already received as a gift that went toward our house. The document also included language about family participation expectations, which outlined my ongoing obligation to attend family events, support family decisions, and defer to Beverly and her husband on certain matters related to their grandchildren's upbringing. It was functionally a contract to keep behaving the way I'd been behaving. Formalized. Witnessed. Signed. I read it twice. Then I folded it and set it back on the table. "I'll need to have my attorney review this before I sign anything," I said. Beverly smiled. "Of course. We'd expect nothing less." Tara said, "It's really just a formality." I nodded. I said nothing else. I helped May into her coat, said my goodbyes, and got in the car. Scott didn't say much on the drive home. I didn't either. May fell asleep in her car seat before we reached the freeway. That night, after May was in bed and her fever had broken and I'd finally exhaled the breath I felt like I'd been holding since October, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and looked at the document Beverly had given me. I thought about signing it. I'm being honest. Part of me thought, this is just the price. This is what you pay to keep the peace. And for a long time, that calculation had felt worth it. But sitting there at 11:30 on a Sunday night, I thought about May. Not May right now, 5 years old, and sleeping and feverish and precious. May at 15. May at 25. May watching her mother fold herself smaller and smaller so that other people could take up more space. May learning that love requires contracts. May learning that belonging costs something, and that the cost is always borne by the same person. I put the document in a folder. Then I opened my laptop. I've worked in compliance long enough to know people in legal. I have a former colleague, Diane, who has been a family law attorney in our state for 14 years. We're not close friends, but we're friendly. I emailed her at 11:45 on a Sunday night, which probably told her something about the nature of my situation. She replied Monday morning. Said she could meet Tuesday. I rearranged my schedule and went. Diane read the document carefully. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said, "This is not a formality." She explained what portions were potentially enforceable, what portions were likely not, and what signing it would mean practically. She also asked me a series of questions about my marriage, my finances, and my living situation that made it clear she was building a picture of something larger. By the end of the meeting, I had a clearer view of my own life than I'd had in years. I also had a referral to a financial planner and the name of a couples therapist. Diane said was excellent. Scott and I had never done therapy. He'd always said we didn't need it, that we were fine, that people who went to therapy were people who couldn't work things out on their own. I used to half agree with that. Now I heard it differently. I didn't tell Scott about the meeting with Diane. I didn't tell him I'd started keeping records. Dates, incidents, things Beverly had said in front of witnesses. I didn't tell him I'd made an appointment with the financial planner to understand exactly where we stood. I went to all of it quietly, the way he went quiet when his family made me uncomfortable. Silence, it turned out, worked in both directions. 3 weeks passed. Beverly called twice to ask when I planned to return the signed document. I told her I was reviewing it with my attorney, which was true. She told Scott I was being difficult and litigious, and Scott told me his mother was upset. I said, "I know." He said, "Can you just sign it? It's not a big deal." That sentence, those 6 words, I've thought about them often since. It's not because they were cruel. Scott didn't say them cruelly. He said them the way he said most things, as if the situation was a logistical problem rather than a human one. "Can you just sign it?" As if I was the obstacle. As if the issue was my reluctance to think as easy rather than the document itself, which asked me to legally formalize my own diminishment. I said, "No." He looked at me the way people look when they've asked you to do something simple, and you've refused without adequate explanation. "Lily?" "No, Scott, I'm not signing it." He didn't push it further that night. But the next weekend was Thanksgiving, and Beverly had already informed us we'd be hosting the family meal at our house, which I had agreed to back in September without really understanding what I was agreeing to, and the document was, I knew, going to come up again. Thanksgiving was a Wednesday to Sunday affair. Beverly and her husband arrived Wednesday evening and immediately began assessing our house for insufficiencies. The kitchen was too small for the meal Beverly had planned. The tablecloth I'd bought was the wrong color. The children's table I'd arranged in the living room was fine, Beverly said, but she had a different idea about placement. I cooked for 3 days. I don't mean I helped cook. I mean I was the person who planned the menu, ordered the groceries, did the prep, managed the timing, and cleaned up. Beverly supervised. Tara contributed a casserole dish she'd made in her own kitchen and transported in a cooler, which everyone praised as though she had personally grown the ingredients. Thanksgiving dinner itself was actually fine. Great-Grandma Agnes was there again, and she sat next to May the whole evening and taught her a card game and let her win. And watching that was the best part of my week. Most of the extended family was pleasant enough in the way that people are when they're eating good food and not yet tired of each other. It was Friday morning when Beverly came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up the last of the dishes and set the document on the counter next to the sink. "I want to resolve this before we leave Sunday," she said. "It's creating tension." I kept washing the pan I was washing. "I'm still reviewing it with my attorney. You've had 3 weeks. These things take time." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lily, I want to be honest with you." I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I looked at her. "Scott's father and I have worked very hard to build something for this family. When Scott married you, we welcomed you. We've always treated you as one of our own." She paused. But there are people in this family who have concerns about priorities, about loyalty. Another pause. About where your real commitments are. I asked her what that meant. She said, "It means we need to know that you're with this family fully. Not just when it's convenient," I said. "I've been with this family for 7 years." She nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they're not actually agreeing with you. Then she said, "Sign the document, or I don't think you belong here." 7 years. 7 years of dinners and holidays and birthdays and casseroles I didn't ask for and opinions I never requested. 7 years of swallowing things I should have said out loud. 7 years of watching Scott choose peace over partnership. I looked at my mother-in-law in my own kitchen on the Friday after Thanksgiving, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, something more like clarity. "I won't be signing it," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me? I won't be signing the document. Not today, not after more time. I've had it reviewed, I understand what it is, and I'm not signing it." Beverly stared at me. I don't think anyone had said a flat no to her in quite some time. "Then we have a problem," she said. "I think we've had one for a while," I told her. She left the kitchen. I stood at the sink for a moment. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and texted Diane. "I think I'm ready to talk about next steps." What came next was not fast, and it was not easy, and anyone who tells you that leaving a situation like that feels like freedom, immediately and completely, is leaving something out. It felt like grief. It felt like failure. It felt like I was destroying something that a part of me was still hoping could be saved. But I had stopped asking the wrong question. The wrong question was, how do I fix this? The right question was, is this fixable? And the honest answer, after 7 years, was that you cannot fix something the other person doesn't believe is broken. Over the following weeks, I did what I had to do. I kept notes. I met with Diane regularly. I talked to the financial planner, whose name was Andrew, and who helped me understand what our joint finances looked like and what a separation would mean practically. I opened a personal checking account. I spoke to my HR department about adjusting my direct deposit. None of it was dramatic. All of it was deliberate. I also had the hardest conversation I've ever had in my adult life, which was telling Scott what I was doing and why. I didn't do it dramatically. I didn't do it in the middle of an argument. I waited until May was at school on a Tuesday morning, and I sat down with him at the kitchen table, and I told him that I had consulted an attorney, that I was filing for divorce, and that I had already begun the process of separating our finances. He stared at me for a long time without speaking. "This is because of the document," he finally said. "It's because of 7 years," I told him. The document was just the last one. He looked like he wanted to argue. He also looked, for the first time in a long time, like he was actually listening. Not waiting for his turn to speak. Listening. "I've been trying to tell you for years that I couldn't keep doing this," I said. "And every time, you waited for it to pass. I'm not angry at you for that, Scott. I understand why you did it. But I needed a partner, and what you gave me was someone who needed the peace more than he needed me." He didn't say his mother meant well. He didn't say I was being too sensitive. He just sat there, and I watched something shift behind his, and it was the saddest I felt through the entire process. The divorce took 8 months. It was not pretty, and anyone who says divorce is ever truly amicable is describing something I've never experienced. But it was not vicious either. We had a child together. We both loved May more than we were hurt, and that in the end was the thing that held. What Beverly did when Scott told her. She called me. She said I had destroyed her family and that I would regret it. She said things that I am choosing not to repeat because repeating them would give them more space than they deserve. What Tara did. She texted Scott that she'd always known this would happen. He showed me the text later. I don't know why he showed me. Maybe because he was finally starting to see things. What May did, 6 months into the separation, she climbed into my lap one afternoon and said, "Mommy, you seem less tired." She was 5. She noticed what the adults in my life had spent years pretending wasn't there. I did not leave the state. I want to be clear about that, because taking a child across state lines without legal agreement is something that requires careful legal coordination, and Diane made that very clear at the start. What I did was find a townhouse 12 minutes from May's school and 8 minutes from my office. I arranged a parenting schedule with Scott that worked for May. I built, slowly and deliberately, a life that had enough room in it for me. The job thing came later, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was offered a position at a company based out of Denver that I'd been informally talking to for over a year. More responsibility. Better title. The kind of work I'd been doing for a decade finally being recognized at the level it deserved. I called my parents. I called my best friend, whose name is Wendy, and who had driven 3 hours to help me move into the townhouse and had never once said, "I told you so," even though she absolutely could have. Then I accepted. Beverly found out through Scott. She called him, not me, which was consistent. She said I was dragging May away from her family, and that it was exactly what she'd always expected from me. What actually happened? May stayed enrolled in her school. The parenting schedule adjusted. Denver was an hour and 20 minutes by plane. We made it work, because when two people are actually trying to make something work for their child, they generally can. The first morning I woke up in my apartment in Denver, in a place that was entirely my own, with no document on any table asking me to prove my loyalty, or limit my expectations, or agree to belong to someone else's idea of a family. I lay there for a few minutes before getting up. I thought about the Sunday dinner in October, the documents sliding across the table, Beverly's voice saying, "Sign this or you're no longer welcome here." I thought about all the versions of myself I'd tried to become to fit into a space that was never shaped for me. I got up. I made coffee. May called from her dad's house because she always called in the morning, and I sat by the window while she told me everything important about her current favorite book, and I listened to every word. I've been asked, since then, whether I regret the 7 years, the dinners, the casseroles, the signed-away Sundays, the things I let pass that I should have named out loud. I don't regret loving Scott. I don't regret May. I don't even regret trying, for as long as I did, to make it work. What I regret is thinking, for all that time, that making myself smaller was the same thing as being kind. Beverly signed a new estate document. Eventually. One that did not include language about daughter-in-laws or participation wage requirements. Scott told me this almost as an apology. He has become, in the years since, a better co-parent than he was a husband, which sounds like an insult, but is actually the truth and not entirely his fault. He needed distance from his family to find out who he was inside it, and in that way, maybe I gave him something too. The last time I saw Tara was at May's school holiday concert. We sat on opposite sides of the auditorium. May was in the second row wearing a red sweater, singing slightly off-key with complete confidence, and I watched her and thought, this is what I was protecting. This girl who sings like nobody's listening. This daughter who climbs into my lap and tells me I seem less tired. This small, fierce, entirely unafraid person who will grow up watching her mother stand in her own space and not apologize for it. The night Beverly put that document on the table, I think she was trying to tell me what I was worth. What she didn't understand is that I'd already started figuring that out on my own. And once you know it, no piece of paper can take it back.